Howdy, Humanities 2, Shasta College. Well, we're getting down to the last topic. We're going to hit it as much depth as we can in this course. We've gone from Florence, Italy, to the Netherlands, to England. And now we're going to Hollywood. Cinema, the birth of cinema. Before I tackle that awesome topic, make sure you guys see the assignments. I posted some different things on the syllabus I took away. Yes, you'll be happy. I think, maybe. I took away the final research paper and I replaced it with a sixth essay, a critical analysis of the film Citizen Kane. Now, you'll have to pay for it unless you have it on a streaming service. It's on YouTube. But also, it's in Shasta College through Canopy. At least they used to have it. It should be there. If it isn't, I'm sorry. You got to shell out a couple bucks. It's not much. I think it's $3 to rent it. And it's a classic. It's a groundbreaking film that changed everything in cinema. Came out in 1941, directed by Orson Welles. It's that important. And remember, I'll talk about this more. Look at the instructions. I'm not asking for a review of the film. I'm not asking you to do research and just tell me the bio of the film, although you might want to do that so you can learn something about it. But I want you to watch the film. Yes, torturous. Watching the film is torture, especially I know it's in black and white. But it's that important of a film and things to look for. I mentioned it in the assignment. What you're going to look for in your analysis of the film. Why does it matter? That's the theme of this whole course. Is look at the direction, Orson Welles. Look at the writing, Orson Welles and Mankiewicz, who co-wrote the script. They won an Academy Award for it. Look at the photography, the cinematography of the great Greg Toland with his use of deep focus. Groundbreaking photography. Look at the story and the themes. It's mostly told in flashbacks, but there's no typical flashback. It's very cleverly constructed. It was cutting new cinema for the time. Came out, 80 years ago, folks. And they're still trying to duplicate it to this day. That's how important the film is. Look at the themes. What is the movie about? What do you think it's about? And I'm not talking about the plot. I'm talking about the themes. Love, loss, regret, fame, glory, riches, poor. What are the themes? And there's many. Have fun with it. Write a 3-page essay. And go as deep as you can. And no complaining about the black and white, because I know the younger generation loathes black and white, essentially. Put you to sleep, I get it. But some of our greatest works of cinema art are in black and white. And then also look at the syllabus. I had to change some totals around. Now there's 100 points. I had to make the reflection journal worth a little bit more, so do a good one. I added the discussions in on that, so I have to go back and look at all your discussions to make sure you kept up, or you won't get the 20 points. It's actually easy 20 points if you just put some thought into it. What we did that week or day, whatever you choose to write about, you saw the samples and a little reflection, meaning how did you feel about it? What did you get out of it? What do you think the theme of that day was? Was it successful? Was it not? And it's okay to be critical. Maybe paragraph or so for each lecture, class, paper we're doing, something like that. It's a 6 weeks course, so there could be 6 entries with a paragraph or 2 each entry explaining what went on, what you got out of it, what lecture you watched, what chapter did you read, what did you learned about Michelangelo, what did you learn about Dutch painters, what did you learn about Shakespeare, anything. And don't just list it like we did Shakespeare, we did Dutch painters. Okay, what did you get out of it? Go into more detail. Analyze. The whole point of this class, at least the direction I've taken on it, is to analyze the material. Without critical analysis, you're not learning anything. You're just watching documentaries and verbatim telling me what they're about or something. I want to know deeper than that. Why these artists are so important. And that's the key to the whole course. And it's the key to the next batch of art we're going to be covering. We're in early 20th century. We're going to study cinema for the next several lectures. Probably end the class on cinema. Also, that's a fancy word for films. That's a fancy word for movies. They used to call them moving pictures. Cinema is a French term. A lot of French terms describe our cinema because the French almost invented cinema. You think it was an American invention? Yes, the camera was invented, the first camera by Thomas Edison. He's the guy that did the light bulb. He also did many other things, including the phonograph. You know what that is, folks? Plays your vinyl. But it was the French, the Lumiere brothers, and I'll show you, make you guys, torture you with this brief documentary of this stuff. You know where it is. It's going to be on Canvas. I'll post it soon. Kind of gives you a thumbnail sketch of the beginnings of these things, beginning of cinema. I'm going to be quoting a lot of famous, groundbreaking filmmakers, but I want to start off with a quote from Jean-Luc Godard, French filmmaker who's 90 now, and he's still making films, folks. He broke new ground in the late 50s in France is with a film called Breathless. It was defined what they call the French New Wave, which definitely had a lifelong effect on American cinema, European cinema, Asian cinema. Jean-Luc Godard, who is a tough interview, but he's also loves cinema probably more than life. I understand that. I probably do too. My entire existence since I was 4 years old has been movies. Yes, much to my parents' chagrin. Talk about more about that later. But once you hooked into a movie, it's hard to grow out of it. I'm still exploring it. I teach cinema here at Shasta College. I write about cinema. I've written many screenplays. Got to write and direct a couple of films. I'm working on a film now that I wrote, a documentary. So once cinema gets in your blood, it doesn't go away. It's like a religion. It's who you become. It's who you are. Going to a movie theater to me was like going to a religious place, like church. Didn't go to church much, but I went to the movies every weekend. When the movies changed once a week in my hometown. And I would go in there and not come out all day. I would watch the movies twice in one day. In those days, you could stay in the theater all day once you pay your fee. Now they kick you right out after the screening. Those days are over of hiding in the movie theater from life. I think I could actually safe to say everything I've learned about life has been through cinema. and literature, art, meaning painting mostly, and music. They were my mother, my father, and my aunt, and my uncle. They were my family. Also, you'll notice that I assign a documentary for you guys to watch for the final quiz, which I won't do until next week. First of the next week. It is called Easy Rider Raging Bulls, and I've just jumped way ahead in cinema to the 1960s and 70s when cinema changed, had a global change from about 1969, it lasted to about 1979, where directors, young directors, I named several of them, there's a bunch I left off, but you'll see them in the documentary. That's also posted in Canvas right now. And if you could find another copy of it, that's free, folks. And the only one I could find on YouTube free is has Spanish subtitles. If that bothers you, sorry. If not, you could probably pay $3 and see it. Or I think Canopy used to have it. They've changed since the COVID changed. They've got all sorts of things that they don't have anymore. So I don't know if they still have that. They should. I used to sign it, so it should be there. Anyway, there was a revolution in Hollywood during that time. I'm going to talk about it more as we get closer to the quiz. Watch that film. You got a whole week to watch it. Try to enjoy it, but also make notes because the quiz is going to be based on that documentary. It's going to be a essay quiz. There'll be 3 or 4 questions dealing with that movie, and you'll analyze and critically explain something I'm asking you to do, and you'll hand it in. You'll have probably 1 day to do it. I'll assign it and have it due the next day where you upload it. I'm not putting the assignments out there yet because it's too soon. So that's what the quiz is going to be based on. So yes, folks, you got to watch Citizen Kane to write your paper, and you have to watch this documentary to take the test. But come on, how bad is it? At least you're not reading chapter after chapter. Are you? No. You're a visual generation. You can handle it. Anyway, and try to enjoy it. Try not to think of it as drudgery. I'll talk more about the quiz and that documentary as we get closer to that day. But today I want to talk about the birth of cinema, which started, technically the movie camera was made in the late 19th century as a way of, we already had film, we had still photographs, but how we needed more and trying to make the image move. That's why they're called movies, folks. Moving pictures, that was the original name of it. And it started I would say properly about 1902 or so. And the Lumiere brothers in France were starting to make films on these cameras. Nobody ever heard of these things. And they were shown in these devices called Nickelodeons. You pay a nickel into a machine, we'll look down into a machine, sort of like a video arcade, except for it's not video arcade, it's something else. And you would see the moving picture. And mostly they were simple little stories that took a minute to tell. A man riding a horse, a man sneezing, a woman and a man kissing. Ooh, it was naughty too. We never saw that in public before. One of the first story films ever made was made in 1903 called Trip to the Moon by Frenchman, and he was a sci-fi film about man going to the moon. I'll probably, the documentary I'm going to make you guys look at involving that, we'll show some clips from it. Maybe you've seen some clips from it. It's It's a legendary film that started people looking at films as a way of telling a story, and people were insatiable. They wanted to see more and more and more. And so films became more adult, more serious. They just weren't this kind of silly thing where you watch a dancer dance or a couple kiss. Um, you put together a story like a play, like a stage play, except for there's no dialogue, folks, because they didn't have sound. There was no way to record their voices. Although most silent films do have sound, they had a way of uh, putting in sound effects, explosions, etc. And they also usually had live music accompanying the film, so it wasn't silent. And later, when they had the ability to marry the film with a film strip that had sound on it, the sound was on the film itself. It wasn't. In the old days, they used to have the musicians in the movie theater playing the music. A lot of times, a small orchestra, sometimes just one person on a piano, and they would do the sound effects also. So there was no such thing as be able to record synchronized verbal sounds, so nobody's talking. So they had to pantomime the acting. That's why the acting is very expressive physically. That's why it looks kind of hokey or corny nowadays because they're over emoting their sadness or their happiness uh, through their physicality. And they're in black and white. There was no such thing as color. It was normal to be in black and white. They didn't have the ability to do color yet. They're developing that. Now, some silent films did tint the frame films. That was different. They could tint the frame, say, tint it red or blue to suggest anger, or uh, blue would be nighttime. But that was not really color. That didn't come in until the late 20s. And even then, that's when sound came out. Also, it was rarely used in Hollywood because it was an expensive process. Probably the first most famous color film was Wizard of Oz. If you've seen Wizard of Oz, you know half of it's in black and white. When they're in the land of Oz, it's in color. That was a revolution. So when you're writing and looking and taking notes, do not complain or moan and groan how there's no sound and you don't understand the story. Yes, you will, because they put up title cards like subtitles to explain what's going on. And the actors are emoting physically, and so you understand what that looks like. Uh, and it's in glorious black and white. We have black and white films. Really, black and white was the norm until almost the 1960s. All of television was black and white until Bonanza and Disney. It used to be called Disneyland, the Wonderful World of Disney. They used to call it the Wonderful World of Color. Those are the first TV. Most people didn't have color TVs. They weren't invented yet. And so nobody missed it. Nobody's missing color or sound in the early silent films because there was no such thing. It's like missing something right now in art, whatever it is. You don't miss what's not there or what you can't have. But technology is changing constantly, just like it is now with the internet and YouTube and everything else. It was changing that rapidly then, but it's not the digital world, the computer world. It was different. And so when you look at these films and think about why these films existed, why they mattered for the time they were made, and how the audiences loved them, you have to look at what's going on in the culture. Think about that on your test. That's what the questions are going to be about. It's what's going on in the culture and how the movies reflect that. So in the silent era, it was the industrial age. most people in 1905 didn't have a car. Yes, the plane was around, but nobody could dream about going up in an airplane, but it was starting. So the industrial age is happening. Industrialism, machinery to make our lives easier, supposedly. Farming, industrial. Instead of the plow with the horse, they had a little machine like a tractor that could pull the plow. So it was changing rapidly during this time in the early 20th century. Early cinema started on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, because that's where the inventions started. One of the first movie studios was in New Jersey. It's still there. It's a historical site. It's a big black box. That's maybe, I don't know, 400 square feet, say as big as a room. And that's where Thomas Edison made the very first films in this country in that black box. It's called the Black Maria. And it rotates on a track to try to catch the sun. The roof would open because they knew then their film needed light, lots of light. And this is before they developed new film stocks that became faster, what they call faster. If anybody's a photographer out there, you know what I'm talking about. And then you could film in lower light. And now think about how you could film. You could film a movie on your cell phone and really with a candlelight. That's how the digital world has changed filming and lighting. But we're not there yet. We're still over 100 years away on that one. So these silent films were reflecting what's going on in the culture. In the 20s, before we cranked up into World War I, we made a ton of films. One of the most famous films was by D.W. Griffith, made in 1915 or thereabouts, called Birth of a Nation. It is, you can watch the whole thing on YouTube if you want. It's an interesting film done during our Civil War, 1865 or thereabouts. And lots of new methods. He developed a lot of new methods. He filmed the battle sequences very realistically. He had many different cameras. He had them on pulleys. They're learning how to move the camera, not just statically have the camera here and the acting just going on in front of it. He had 100 extras on horseback, gunfire. They actually went to war and they filmed it. He essentially became to develop the close-up, just like here, a frame. Before then, we couldn't really see the actors' faces that clear. Most early films, we didn't know what the actors really looked like because the camera was set like where an audience would be in a stage play, and the actors were on the stage quite a ways away. That all changed with people like D.W. Griffith developing the close-up for emotional settings. You want to see somebody cry, get a close-up on their face. You want to see what they're thinking. Think about that, folks, what they're thinking. Get a close-up of their face with music and a title card that says they're contemplating murder. That was a great use of the close-up, and he developed all that. The film was controversial because it is, without a doubt, a racist film. Now, when the film came out, it was a huge hit. It played all over the country. It was one of the biggest moneymakers in the history of a very young industry. Wilson, who was our president, showed it at the White House many times. It was his favorite film. Now, what happened was, in the film, slaves are sort of set free in a way, and they become troublesome to the white people in the town. They're evil folks. The guys are all trained to have sex with the white women, and they don't show any African American women really. It's all about guys and with their disgusting ways. They had them portrayed as being lazy and stupid and sitting around all day eating chicken and watermelon. And you have to Google what racism is to understand why they always had them eating chicken and watermelon. That was a racist trope that has never died, probably. And then when these black slaves who are soldiers invade a farm of white people, who comes to save the day? Not the army, not the cavalry, the Ku Klux Klan. That's right, folks. They came to the rescue and they saved the white people and the white women from getting raped. They are the heroes of this film, Birth of a Nation, a groundbreaking revolutionary film. It was so revolutionary that the Ku Klux Klan, which had few numbers in those days, all of a sudden, overnight, they had over 100,000 members who were inspired by that film. And they had huge marches everywhere in Washington, D.C., in their white robes, folks. Now, what happened was African American audiences in cities, Pittsburgh and Chicago and New York, started writing about the racism in this film in their local African American newspapers, and people had to look at it differently. And then it was reevaluated. And it put an asterisk on W. Griffith's career. It's still there. This revolutionary filmmaker was born during the Civil War. He said that's the world he lived in. He didn't feel it was racist, just showing what was. He tried to make up for it. A couple years later, he made an incredible film called Intolerance, just about that very subject. It's literally the entire history of mankind, from cavemen to Jesus Christ to the Roman Empire to modern times. He tried to cover all of mankind. It's an ambitious film. I guess he would be considered the epic filmmaker of his day, like a Steve Spielberg or George Lucas. Big scale. But his career essentially fizzled out. He didn't have much of a career in the sound era. He was considered old and antiquated, and this was the new world. So that's what's going on in the world, folks. Then we go to World War I, where we go to war with Germany, and it was carnage of the highest order. It was our first modern mechanism war. They had tanks, and they had planes, and they had machine guns. Yes, they were still fighting on horseback. You know how many horses died in that war? A lot. The very last cavalry charge in our history was during World War I, a stupid charge, horses pitted against machine guns. America was late to the war. We lost a lot of guys in the war because the fighting was so intense. Maybe you've seen some movies based on that. There's been several made. It was a different kind of warfare, where it was called trench warfare, and guys would be in these long trenches for months on end. They are eating in the trenches. They are the latrines are in the trenches, and they would go over the top and charge full on into machine gun fire and be mowed down by the thousands, until somebody got smart and starts thinking this is not the way to fight a war. They called it the war to end all wars. And when we came back from the war victorious, Germany was still seething from the loss. And of course, they're going to pop their head up in about another 10 years with the rise of Nazism, but not yet. And we came into a Renaissance, which I mentioned already last week, the Harlem Renaissance, the 1920s. Women got the right to vote. They outlawed booze. People bought booze anyway, and they had fun dancing and getting liquored up in speakeasies. Women cut their hair. Women started smoking cigarettes, and they started dancing like there was no tomorrow, and drinking with the boys. Never happened before. That sort of freedom. They called it the Roaring Twenties because it was roaring. It was happening. The women were called flappers because the style of dress and the dance styles. This is when jazz music started. And the silent films of those days were mostly a lot of comedies. The three main comedians in those era of the Roaring Twenties would have been, the main one would have been Charlie Chaplin. Maybe you've heard of him. Buster Keaton would be number 2, and Harold Lloyd would be number 3. They made much money at the box office. Their movies are hugely popular. Maybe you've heard of some of them. Buster Keaton made The General, Sherlock Jr. Charlie Chaplin made many films. The one that made him, put him on the map, was called The Kid. Heartbreaking film about a bum, essentially a hobo, raising a child. Beautiful black and white, no sound. Complicated stories. But there were serious films being made during this time also. King Vidor made a wonderful film called The Crowd, which they're still copying to this day. Fritz Lang made one of the first sci-fi films ever made called Metropolis. You can watch it on YouTube right now. They've had so many different soundtracks that even to that movie that even Pink Floyd did a soundtrack to it. Watch it with any of the soundtracks. It's mind-boggling, the technology. And he made that film in Germany before Hitler took over and kind of put the kibosh on all creative filmmakers. And he was a Jew, and so his life was in danger if he stayed around. So things were hopping in the world. It was busting at the seams with the possibilities. The culture's busting at the seams, and the movies are reflecting the culture, and then the movies are holding up a mirror that reflects the culture back at them. So people go to the movies, and they see things they relate to. They see themselves up there, or who they want to be, or the fantasy world. In the 1930s, when the Depression hit, it was all about fantasy films, musicals with Fred Astaire dancing, beautiful sequences of fantasy world, so that people went to the movies. They didn't have a job. They couldn't pay their rent, but they could afford a nickel at the movie theater to watch Fred Astaire in tuxedo dancing across the silver screen. In that same era of the 30s, the Depression, when booze was now legal, by the way, crime had reared its ugly head during the Prohibition, and gangsters took over. Chicago gangsters who were dealing with illegal liquor, famous people you've heard of, maybe Al Capone and Dutch Schultz and Babyface Nelson, they all were criminals. Lots of killings, lots of shooting. This is not the mafia, folks. That's later. All based on Prohibition. And so gangster films were popular in the early 30s. People like James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson, Paul Muni made Scarface, the first one, not the remake with Al Pacino. Public Enemy was probably the first gangster film in 31. With sound, by the way. Sound has come now. And it's a rise and fall of a murderous gangster. And he's charmingly played by one of the great actors of all time, but especially in this era. Hmm, why can I think? I just said his name. Now I'm drawing a blank. Uh, anyway, he made several films. He had a long career. Died in the 1980s. Another popular film during the Depression were monster films. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, The Wolfman. These were popular because they were cheap to make. People like to be scared. They still do. Do you go to horror movies? And um, people still paid the money, and it was escapism, pure and simple, from the Depression. You can go into a movie theater, watch Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, and be relieved of the reality that waited for you outside that door, which was no job. How do you pay the rent? Also, monster movies reared its head because in Europe, Germany, Hitler is coming into power. Nazism, fascism, new social order was starting to happen, and we didn't know what to do. Our government was not in the mood to go into another war. The people did not want it. And so we could fight evil in a movie, though. We could fight Frankenstein's monster. We could fight Dracula. We couldn't fight Hitler. And that's key to what was going on in the culture. When FDR, Roosevelt, wanted to help Europe get rid of Hitler, the American people said no. His hands were tied. It wasn't until Japan bombed Pearl Harbor that war was declared on all fronts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to just get right here through the Depression. We got to go kind of fast. I usually try to, when I teach this film during the year, 17 weeks, I take a week and I stay in each decade. Now I got to go through a couple decades a day. I'm going to try to find a little documentary for you guys to watch so you get a visual of what I'm saying, what I'm telling you. Maybe you've seen a silent film. Oh, I have this question for you. Do you like movies? Start a discussion. I'll put it up there. What is your relationship to movies? I mean, do you like them or do you love them? Do you live your life through them? What are they? Don't be afraid. I know you all love X-Men, Wolverine. That's okay. Spider-Man, Black Panther, whatever. The generation before you would be Star Wars. Gen X, which was below me, they still got their Star Wars pajamas. Yes, they do, and they're not embarrassed to tell you that they have them hidden away. Star Wars was their touchstone films. My generation would be the '60s, the '70s. The documentary I want you to watch is a Rite of Raging Bull. That's my touchstone. When I saw those films when I was 17, 18, I wanted to go to Hollywood and be that. I wanted to direct like those directors and write those scripts. That's what took me there. Right when I got there, Star Wars had just opened and it ruined everything for me because it became outer space operas, high tech, and sequels. That's in that documentary. So I hope you guys look at it, watch it. Um, that's how important cinema is. My parents' cinema would have been these films I'm talking about, the Depression films, not the silent. They're not that old, folks. Uh, my mother and dad loved these films I just mentioned, monster films, the musicals, films in the 1940s, which we'll talk about next lecture, propaganda World War II films, the 50s. post-World War II films, and when acting changed with people like Marlon Brando, James Dean, 60s, when the Beatles changed everything, and race riots and protests for Vietnam changed everything. So that's what we're in for. So that's it. When Jean-Luc Godard, he said a couple of brilliant things. He still does at 90. He said at one time, everything is cinema. In fact, his book, which I have over there, is called Everything is Cinema. Now, does that sound odd? Everything? How can that be? When he said that in 1960, 60 years ago, it did seem like, oh, come on, what's he talking about? Well, I understand it. I still understand it. And now think about it with TikTok and YouTube and people filming their friends on skateboards and eating dinner and posting your cats and your dogs doing funny things. We film everything on our cell phones and we post it somewhere, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you post that. You know you do it to your friends, and don't you get a thrill when someone gives you a thumbs up? I know you do. We all want validation. So when he said everything is cinema, boy, he didn't know how right he was. He also said truth is 24 frames a second. Now, we don't use film cameras anymore. Mostly it's all digital, hard drive. Now a movie camera comes with a hard drive. And we're taping on digitally. But in the old days, it was film, celluloid, where you actually had to run the film through the camera. And it used to go at 24 frames a second. Out the lens. And he said truth. He called it truth at 24 frames a second. That's how much he believes in cinema. He would say, the moment the camera is turned on, the lie begins. Think about that for a second. You've tried to pose your friends or do some little quirky video of your vacation or at the lake somewhere. You've shot some video on your cell phone. You know you have. And people kind of stiffen up. They go, oh, don't shoot me. Don't do this. But after a while, they kind of loosen up and maybe they forget that you're shooting them. Or maybe you do it secretly. So he would say, the moment the camera is switched on, the lie begins. Leave it on long enough and the truth will arrive. With that, everything is cinema. My next lecture, I'll be covering the 1940s, 50s. We're going movies full out, folks. On the discussions, tell me what your relationship is with movies. Thank you. See you next time where the story of film continues.